Hey everyone, this is Kathy from Kato Handmade, and I wanted to welcome you to my video tutorial for the Tuesday Tote. This is a pattern by Knotted Threads Company, and this is the latest in the Marathon series that is put together by the Marathon Sewciety. So I'm going to be making this version here. This is option B, I believe, in the pattern. I'm going to be making this version with the center panel Tuesday Tote. So let's go ahead and go over the pieces that we're going to need. Okay, so for my Tuesday Tote, I'm going to be using this really pretty, here let me zoom out a little bit here, this really pretty waterproof canvas. And I will link in the notes for the video description for where I got all the supplies that I'm using today. So this is going to be the lining pieces, and I have two of those. And then I have two center pieces. Let's see, I'll do that way. And then I have the side pieces. So I already have the corners cut out, so there's a left and a right. The pattern does provide instructions for how big of the corners to cut out, and you'll also do that on the lining pieces. So I've got, that's for the lining, this is for the outer. Then I'm going to be doing strap webbing, two pieces of that. That's also provided for in the instructions. And because I am doing waterproof canvas, I am not doing any interfacing on any of the pieces. You can if you want to. I just decided that for this one I'm going to make it only waterproof canvas, no lining, or I'm sorry, no interfacing, and I want it to be a little bit floppy, so that's also why I'm not doing the lining or the interfacing. The other option that I'm going to be adding, this is from the add-on, the Weekender add-on pieces. I'm going to be adding a center divider pocket. So for that, I have the center divider pieces. There's two lining and two exterior. And I'm doing all of mine in the same, so it's going to be kind of reversed on the inside from what it is on the outside. So I have two of those, and then you're going to need a zipper also for the center pocket, and then I'm using this large heart keychain, it's almost big enough to be a keychain, a heart zipper pull, so I'll be using that. And then you also have a zipper tab that you'll need for that center pocket. The other items that you will probably need, or at least recommend having on hand, is some double-sided tape. Also, because I'm using waterproof canvas, I'm going to be using this roller to kind of help me get my seams flat. So I'll have that as well. And then if you wanted to add a logo tag of some sort, you could grab that. And that's it. That's all we need. Guys, this is a really quick make. It's a really fun one, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the center pocket first. Okay, so the first thing we're going to work on is the zipper. Now what we need to do is separate the end of the teeth just a little bit. We're going to be folding this corner over at a 90-degree angle, and you can secure it in whichever way is your favorite method. You can do a couple base stitches here. You could also use a lighter if you're using not cotton, because cotton will catch on fire. You could do that to melt the ends a little bit and singe it and hold it. I'm going to be using my favorite little mini stapler. This is a Tim Holtz mini stapler, and I'm just going to catch that end right there just to hold it. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So you're just turning this down at a 90-degree angle, and then adding a little staple. There we go. So we got the corners turned down. Now we're going to install our zipper pull. What I like to use for that is I have this, I call it my zipper jig. I got it off Amazon, and it's also a towel holder. So if you search for towel holder on Amazon, I had one of those plastic ones, and I accidentally knocked it off the table and busted it. So I thought, all right, well, metal it is. Can't break that one so hard or so easily. And I feel like it works really well. for installing zippers. I find it really easy to do. Okay, so once you get your zipper pull installed, now you're going to grab your zipper tab, and then what you're going to do is you're going to fold it in half and then fold the short ends to that center line and fold it in half again. So you're enclosing all of the raw edges, and then you're going to take this. Actually, before I do that, there is a measurement that you're supposed to check on your zipper. You want your zipper to be a certain length. So I will cut that off camera before I sew this on. But basically what you want to do after you get it to the right length, you're going to take your little zipper tab, slide your zipper inside like that, and then you're just going to sew down this edge, enclosing that raw end of the zipper. Okay, so I'll do all that off camera and then I'll be back to show the next step. Okay, once you get that zipper end installed, let's see if I have a couple little scissors. Here we go. I'm just going to trim off that string there. Okay, so once you get that all trimmed up, what you're going to do is you're going to fold it in half, and what you want to do is just find the center mark for your zipper. And I'm just going to pinch it so I can see that line, and then I'm using a friction pen. I might have to use a different pen here. This one's not wanting to work. Let me try this one. This one is a silver marking pen from More Me Know. There we go. Alright, so mark the center there, and then the same, lining up those edges, pinching in the center here, and marking the center on that side. Okay, so you want to make sure you have your centers marked on your zipper, and then for all of your center divider pieces, for your exteriors and your lining, you're going to find the center in the top of each of those. So again, I'll just take it and give it a little finger press, and then mark the center line. And you can mark it on the back also, which I think on this one I'm going to do. I think it'll be easier to see. So this is just going to help you when you're lining up. Yeah, there we go. When you're lining up your zipper, you want to make sure that it's centered exactly on this panel so that you have enough room to sew up the sides. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark the centers on all of the panels. Okay, once I have all of those marked, I'm going to take one of my exterior pieces for the center divider, and marking up, I'm going to take my zipper and flip it over. So lining up the center marks on both, you can see right there and right there. I'm going to lay that down. Again, the zipper is right side down, so it is right sides together with the lining, or with the pocket. I'm just going to clip it in place along the way. Pull this zipper to the center so I can get that end. And this is one area, if you have double-sided tape, if you like using double-sided tape, you could put that down on the zipper and then lay it down, and that would help to hold it in place so it doesn't move. Okay, and then after we get this clipped in place, we're just going to baste along the top edge of the zipper here. Okay, once you get that basted on, it's the full length of the zipper, you are going to grab one of your lining pieces for the pocket, and there are measurements in the pattern for these little corners that you need to draw on the wrong side of your lining panel. So once you get those drawn on, then you're going to line it up so it's right side to right side. You have your little boxes here, at the top. We're going to clip it in place all the way across. Okay, and then you're going to flip it over, and on the back side, so this is the wrong side of your pocket exterior, there are lines that you need to draw, and the measurements are given in the instructions for how far down on each side you want to go, and then you're going to draw a little horizontal line. Okay, once you get that done, our next step is we are going to sew these two together using the regular seam allowance this time, and we're going to use our basting line as a guide. So starting right where the basting line starts, using our regular seam allowance, we're going to stitch all the way down and stop right there where the basting line stops. So that's our next step. Okay, so once you have that stitched on, double check to make sure your line is nice and straight. Now we're going to flip it over to the lining side, and here's where you're going to need some double-sided tape. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a piece of double-sided tape in each corner, just like that, staying within the box that you drew. So along the top to the outer corner, and then from the corner down to the line that you drew. So again, making sure you stay within these little boxes here. Okay, now what we're going to do is, and this is sort of a trust the process moment, you might not have done this type of technique before, so just trust it as we go. We're going to remove the paper backing and fold this corner down to match the lines that we drew. So it's folded down just like that. There's your zipper on the inside. We're going to do the same thing to the other side. So removing the paper backing, and then taking your lining piece and folding it right down to match those lines you drew. Okay, so now you have sort of these little dog ear corners here folded in. Okay, so now we want to flip it over, and these lines that we drew here, we're going to put a piece of double-sided tape just above that line that we drew. Okay, so a little piece of double-sided tape there and there. We're going to remove the paper backing here. And then we are going to turn everything over. So now we're going to push it right side out. And that tape that we put down, hopefully, is going to help hold our seam allowance here. And depending on the type of material, because I have this little bit of a plasticky backing on mine, sometimes it doesn't want to hold all the way or hold for very long. So I'm just going to work quickly and I'll pin it or clip it, I should say. All right, so once you get it turned through, you're just going to clip all the way down the long sides. Okay, so your lining or your pocket pieces are now wrong sides together, right sides out. And this is where, if I wanted to, I could use my little like mini steamroller. I don't really know what it's called, but to me it looks like a steamroller. So you can just kind of roll along that seam. On the waterproof canvas, I find that it helps sometimes. It's not always perfect, but I find that it does help to kind of tell the waterproof canvas what you want it to do. Okay, so that's how that looks. clipped on and clipped on the back. The last thing that we have to do here now is to top stitch along this edge. So according to the pattern instructions, we're going to stitch all the way across end to end, securing this on this zipper. And then once you get that done, we're going to repeat the entire process for the other side. Okay, top stitched, everything's looking beautiful. So now I'm going to do the exact same process on the other side, and I am just going to zoom through this one. I'll speed up the tape so you don't have to watch me do all the steps, but the exact same thing we did on the other side, we're going to do on this side. Okay, once you get both sides top stitched, what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up to the center just to keep it out of the way, to keep your zipper pull out of the way, and we're going to put the two linings together and the two outers together. So matching it up along the side, just going to clip it in place there to hold it. Same for the lining. We're just going to clip along the long edges all the way down to these angled corners. We're going to do that on both sides. Okay, so once you have both sides clipped, now what we're going to do is we're going to come down into the corner, and we need to mark a seam allowance line. This is going to be our stitch line. The measurement is provided for in the pattern, and this is just going to help us to make sure we get the right stitch here, the right seam allowance. Okay, so once you get that marked on those corners, now on the other side on the lining, there is a mark on the pattern instruction, on the actual pattern piece, where you could fold. You could do this at the beginning. You end up just folding the pattern piece, and then this is where you're going to cut your lining. So your lining is actually going to be shorter than your exterior pieces. So I'm going to cut mine now. I didn't cut mine before when I cut all these out, so I'm just going to do that right now. Like I said, not a big deal when you cut it, as long as you cut it before we put it all together. Okay, so once I got that cut off, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stitch straight across these lines here, right along this bottom seam, and then I'm also going to stitch across this line on both corners. Okay, so across both of those angled corners, and then across this straight bottom edge on the lining. Alright guys, so the next thing we're going to be doing, first I have to just let you know that the rest of this video is going to have voiceover recording. For whatever reason during filming, my microphone stopped working, so I apologize, but c'est la vie, right? Such is life. Things happen, so let's move on. Alright, so what we want to do here is we just want to remove the clips from the sides, and then we're going to be trimming down the seam allowance by about half here along the bottom. And then also on the other side where the angled corners are, we're going to trim that down by about half as well on both angled corners. Okay, the next step is to turn the zipper pocket inside out, or I guess I should say right sides out. So you're going to be turning it through so the exterior pieces are on the outside and your lining pieces are on the inside. You want to lay it down, zip it closed, lay it down, make sure it's nice and flat. Make sure everything is laying nice and neat on the inside. You can take it over to the iron if you want to give it a little press just to help in those corners, just to make sure everything is laying nice and flat. And as you can see here on the sides, that's where your little pocket, your lining is matching up. There is a gap along the bottom, and that's so that it lays nice and neat and doesn't get caught in those corners there. And the same on the other side. You just want to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat. The corners match up. And then what we want to do is we're just going to sew down that side, and then we're going to sew down the other side. We're just basting this closed, and along the bottom we are basting the 3 open sides closed. Okay, now that that is all stitched, all basted closed along the sides and along the bottom, you can see we have our nice folded corners. Zipping or unzipping it, you can see the inside of the pocket. Everything is looking good, so that looks great. So we are done with this pocket for now. We can set it to the side. Now we are going to move on to the lining. So what we are doing here is we're just going to mark the center bottom. I made a little notch here in this panel so that I knew where the center was. And then along the top, what I'm doing is I'm going to be doing a drop-in lining because since I'm doing the center pocket and no other pockets, there will be no way for me to birth this bag through an opening. So I am going to do a drop-in lining. So what I'm doing here is just drawing a 1/2 inch line along the top edge of the lining panel. So what I'm going to be doing is just turning this edge down, the raw edge down to where that line is, and then that's going to give me my seam allowance along the top, and then when I drop it in, all I'll have to do is sew it closed. So I'm going to do that on both lining panels. I want to mark my lines first because that's going to make it a lot easier during the assembly process later, during the final assembly. I like to do it first before I sew it together because it's a lot easier to draw the lines when you have a nice flat piece of fabric than when you have, it's all sewn together and you have the seam allowances and stuff. Okay, so again, that will be along the top edge of the panels, and that will help us in our final assembly. And then again, on this panel, we want to mark the center of the bottom. So I'm just folding it in half to find that center mark and then making a little snip with the scissors. And that gives me just that little mark there so I know where the center of the panel is. Okay, now I've marked up on the side from the bottom corner. There are measurements provided in the pattern for how far up you want to mark your side panels. And this is going to be where we attach our pocket. So you want it centered and you want it up. The first thing we are going to be doing is attaching our zipper pocket to the lining panel. As you can see, the sides line up perfectly with the sides of our pocket. And what we want to do is just line it up along the bottom there and clip it in place. So again, this is the bottom flat edge of the zipper pocket aligning with the bottom of one of your lining panels. And then once we get that clipped on, we are going to baste it on straight across. Now that it's basted on, what you need to do is grab your other lining panel, line that up. We're going to also clip that on all the way across. Then once you get that clipped all the way across, we are going to sew across the bottom of the panel according to the seam allowance that is provided in the pattern instructions. Okay, once you get that sewn on, you can see that it goes all the way across, nice and straight. That is perfect, just what we want. And now we have a couple options here. We can either butterfly the seams open, or you could just trim off the bottoms. So what I think I'm going to do, so when I say trim off the bottoms, I mean trim it back by about 1/4 of an inch, trim your seam allowance back. But what I'm going to do here is butterfly open my seams, and then I'm going to top stitch from the other side. So once you take it to your machine, you want it right sides up, and you want to make sure that you are only stitching on the lining side. So once your seams are pressed open, you want to make sure you're not stitching on your pocket. You're going to stitch down the one side, flip the pocket over to the other side, and then top stitch down that line. So your pocket is staying loose in the center. It's not stitched down to either side, and you're only stitching on the linings. So again, you want to press those seams open. So that's what it's going to look like from the bottom. And you're going to have one side stitched and the other side with your pocket loose in the middle. Okay, once you have that stitched, you're going to, here, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. You're going to have your top stitching on the lining side. On the bottom, you can see the seam is butterflied open and it is secured. So that's going to give you a nice flat base when you put your bag together. And then on the other side, you can see it's top stitched on the lining panel only. And again, that'll give you a nice flat base for when you put your bag together in the next step. Okay, so now that we have our bottom stitched and top stitched, what we need to do is attach the sides to the side panel. So the side of the pocket is going to be attached to the side panel. And this is where I made those marks. I had them on the front, and then I decided to write them on the back as well, on both sides. And I just thought it was easier to see with it written on the lining side of the panel than it was on the other side. So this is where we're going to take this little line, and then we're going to take the bottom corner of our center divider pocket, and we are going to line that up as close as we can. You're going to have this little flappy thing here, and that's okay. That's what you want because that is going to become our boxed corner later on. So that's just right. Once you get it lined up, we're going to clip it in place all the way up. And then so again, you have this little gap here at the bottom, and that will become our boxed corner, so that's perfect. And then we need to flip it over and attach the other side. So again, taking that line that you marked on your lining panel, and I'm just going to check mine to make sure that it lines up with the other side. So my panels are matching. And that looks good. All right, so now I'm going to clip that one on, and then clip it all the way up the side panel. So all 3 layers are now attached. So your 2 linings and then your side of your center divider pocket. I'm just going to continue clipping all the way to the top. And as you can see, my lining panels match up perfectly, which is exactly what I want. Okay, and then here on the bottom, you can kind of see what we're going for. It's going to be our box corners, But first we need to stitch the side seam down. So moving that bottom out of the way as much as possible, I'm just going to clip that, and then we are going to sew all the way down according to the seam allowance provided in the pattern. We're going to keep these little flaps out of the way and stitch all the way down according to the seam allowance. Okay, once you get that stitched, you can see all the way down here at the bottom, what we have is this little opening, and this is going to become our boxed corner. On the inside, you can get a peek of what it's going to look like. Our pocket is nice and secured in that side seam, so that's perfect. And then for the bottom, we're going to just box that corner. So you want to take your bottom seam and match it up with your side seam as much as possible, as close as you can. You're going to butterfly open that bottom seam, matching it with the side, and then you're going to clip it in place. I just add a couple clips here to make sure it doesn't slip before I take it over to the sewing machine, and then I'm going to stitch across the bottom here according to the seam allowance. Once I get that done, I'm going to just trim the sides back by about half. I'll trim the seam allowance back by about half just to remove some of the bulk there in the side seam. Okay, now that that side seam, that boxed corner is stitched, I'm going to trim it back, trim the seam allowance back by about half, right along that bottom boxed corner. And then I'm just going to clip the side a little bit by about whatever the seam allowance is. I'm just going to clip that into each side, and then that's going to make it a little bit easier for me to get into that piece down there when I'm trimming the sides. So now I'm just trimming along the side panel, the side of our lining panel, trimming the seam allowance down by about half. And once you get to where that pocket is, it gets pretty thick. So it can be a real challenge on your hands to cut through all of that. So you could also try using a rotary cutter, or you could cut it first before you box the corners, which I think is what I'm going to do when I do the other side. Or you could also, instead of cutting them all together, you could cut one side and then cut the other side. Or you could just leave it uncut. Totally up to you. Okay, now that I've done that, we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, that side I cut the seam allowance down first before I did the box corner, and I think that worked really well. So now taking a peek at the inside of the bag, here's a little sneak peek at what it's going to look like. And oh my gosh, I think it's so cute. What I love is that it goes all the way down and they are completely secured sides. Since your pocket is sewn into the bottom seam, you have two completely separate sides with your center pocket. Okay, now that that is done, everything is looking great. Our side seams are trimmed, our lining is done, and we are ready to move on to the next step. All right, guys, so we are moving on to creating our exterior panels. So you're going to need your one center panel, one of your center panels, and then you're going to need two side panels. So you want to make sure they are mirrored, so you have the left corner box cut out, and then you're going to need one with the right corner box cut out. And then what you want to do is we're going to sew this together from the sides. So you're going to flip the panels so they are right sides together. And then you're going to clip all the way down, holding that panel together. So again, right sides together. And then you're clipping along that long straight edge. And then flipping your panel over you're going to lay your other panel down, right sides together, and clip along that other edge. Now what I will say is you guys might think that this is a little backwards to do the lining before the exterior, but for me, the lining was more labor intensive, so I thought, why not do that first, right? Okay, once you get these clipped, we are going to stitch all the way down according to the seam allowance. Then you're going to press your side panels back, pressing the seam allowance towards the center panel. And then you're going to top stitch. So again, we are stitching straight down, both sides. We're going to press our panels away, pushing the seam allowance towards that center panel, and then we are going to top stitch. Okay, now that that is top stitched, you can see I top stitched, pressed the seams towards the center panel, and then just top stitched along the center, and that was it. So that gives us a nice little edge there. It kind of makes that center panel look like it's popping up or coming through a little bit, and then everything lays nice and flat. And again, the seam allowances are pressed towards the center. Top stitched, we're going to do that for both panels. There we go. There's our other panel, nice and complete. Now we are ready for the next step, which is attaching the straps. So now grabbing your straps, you want one of your side panels, you want to grab one of your straps, and then laying it down, butting it right up to the edge of that center panel. You want to have a bit of an overhang, and this is important because you don't want your straps to fray and come loose through using your bag. So once you have that overhang, that's very important so that it helps to keep the straps nice and secure. So we're just butting it up right along the center here, leaving a little bit of an overhang. And then we are going to baste stitch across, attaching the straps. Again, making sure your strap is not twisted when you sew it on. Make sure it's nice and flat, and then baste straight across. Okay, one more step. Now that the straps are attached, I'm going to flip it over, and as you'll notice, I already drew the line that is going to be where I turn the edge down for the drop-in lining. And I do this first before I sew the sides together again so that it's just easier to draw that line. Okay, the last thing that we have to do here before we put it together is if you're adding a logo badge of some sort, there is a measurement provided in the pattern for how far up you want to place your logo in that center panel. So that is an option if you wanted to add that. Do that now before we put the panels together. Okay, so here's where I installed my logo label right on the front center panel. So now we are ready to put these two exterior panels together. So you're going to take them and lay them down right sides together, making sure your straps are on the inside, lining up the bottom. So because we have this center strip, we want to line up these seams as much as possible. And that's just going to make our base look really good if our seams are lined up. So you're going to line that up, put a clip in place, and then I'm going to put one on either side of that seam just to help hold it nice and secure. And then again on the other side, lining up that seam as much as possible. And then add a couple clips to help hold it in place. And as you'll notice, I have a little bit of a gap here in the center, but I think that will be just fine. I think when I sew it, I'll be able to stretch it like this, and then it'll be nice and flat for the final once it's finished. So what we want to do here now is stitch all the way across the bottom according to the seam allowance that is provided in the pattern. And then we are going to butterfly those seams open, and it will give us a nice finished base. All right, so our bottom seam is stitched. Now what we want to do is we want to open up our panels, and we're going to flatten out this seam. So laying your panel right side down, you want to push that seam open as much as possible, and then just kind of give it a good finger press to keep it open. And here's where I like to use my little steamroller again. It kind of helps just encourage the seams to lay open. They don't always stay, but it kind of helps them just kind of know where they're going to be going when I stitch them down. Okay, so giving that a nice press, we're going to take it over to the sewing machine, and then making sure your seams are still butterflied open, you're going to top stitch down each side of that center seam. So I usually stitch about 1/8 of an inch away. So again, you're just going to top stitch down the one side, and then you're going to top stitch down the other side. Okay, now that that is top stitched, everything is looking great. You can see on the back side, it kept our seams nice and open and flat, and that's going to give us a really nice space when we get the bag finished up and turned through. So now what we want to do is sew up the sides. So you're just going to tuck your handles to the inside, and then lining up that side, both of the side panels, you're just going to clip it in place all the way across. Okay, and then once you get that side clipped, we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Clip that all the way across. And then we're going to stitch down both long sides according to the seam allowance. All right, once you get those side seams done, the next thing we need to do is box our corners. So just like we did on the lining, we're going to butterfly open that side seam, matching up those seams as much as possible. You want to make sure they're right on top of each other. And then you're going to add a clip and clip it across, just holding it in place there. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. So pulling that seam open, butterflying the side seam, and then lining it up with that bottom seam. Clip that in place. There you go. All right, now we're going to take it over to the machine, and we're going to sew along both sides according to the seam allowance. Now optionally you can add a second row of stitching, and that just helps to give it a little bit more strength and to take some of the stress off of the stitch lines. Like I did here on the sides, I added 2 rows of stitching right next to each other. You can do that along the bottom as well, and that will just help there. And then we're going to trim the seam allowances here like we did on the linings. Okay, so we're just about ready to put it all together. The last thing we need to do here is just trim up the side seams. So I'm trimming that back by about half along this boxed corner, and I'm going to do the same along the other boxed corner. You could also do it along the side seams if you wanted to trim back your side seams. For this bag, I'm not going to do that. I think it's going to help with my drop-in lining, so I'm just going to leave it as is for this one. Now what I need to do is work on turning down these top edges to that line that I drew on both the lining and the exterior. And this is going to be for my drop-in lining. Now, if you've never done a drop-in lining before, this is a great way. If you don't have a birthing hole, like through a zipper pocket, or your materials are too thick to turn it through, doing a drop-in lining is great because you can just fold these top edges down, and I'll do this one by about 1/4 of an inch, which is the seam allowance that I would be using. And then that way, once you have that seam allowance folded down, and then you're going to do the same thing with the lining, you're going to have that folded down by about 1/4 of an inch, and then you can just drop your lining inside of your bag, attach it, And that's it. You're done. Super easy. Okay, so I'm going to be using this Hyper Stick. It's from Wall-Wack. It is double-sided tape and it is extra sticky. Let me tell you. Just trying to get it out of the bag is a challenge in itself. It is definitely sticking to the bag. So this is a great one to use if you have fabric that might be a little bit resistant to regular double-sided tape. And as you can see here, it's very sticky. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just apply it to the top of the bag, just to the inside, or I guess if you're looking at it from this angle, it would be just to the bottom or the outside of that line. So I'm going to put this tape all the way across and then flip the bag over. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, just adding that tape. And once you get it all the way across, you're going to give it a nice little press and then remove the paper backing. And then I'm just going to pull out the handle here because I think it's going to be easier for turning this edge through. So just the handle for this side. And then I'm just going to fold that material down to meet that line. So right on top of where the sticky tape is. I'm going almost to the edge, but not all the way because I'm going to have to do the corner, the side seams in a second once I get the other side ready. So folding it down all the way across, giving it a nice press with my fingers, flipping it over. Now we're going to do the same thing to this side, removing the paper backing and then folding it down, or I guess it's folding it up from this angle. We're going to do that all the way across. And then once you get to that side seam, you can kind of pull it open and then just fold it down all at once. You can butterfly open the seam if that gives you a little less bulk as you're turning it down. And then what I'll do is I will grab a clip once you get it just right. And then that holds that side seam. That just helps to give it a little extra support there. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing across to the other side seam. And then doing the same thing on this side. Butterflying open that seam, folding down the seam allowance, giving it a nice press, and then clipping it in place to hold it. Okay, now I will also add a couple clips here along the sides of the strap. And that's just because that right there where that seam is, it's a little thick. So it wants to pull up a little bit. So that's just helping that double-sided tape to do its job a little bit easier, just by adding that little clip there. Okay, now you want to turn the bag through so it is right sides out. Push out your corners. All right, you start to get a peek of what your bag's going to look like. We can set that to the side for now, and then we are going to do the exact same thing for the lining. Using that Hyper Stick double-sided tape, we're going to do the same process here. Okay, once you have both of those prepared with your lining your seam allowance turned under, you're now going to take your lining and you're going to slide it inside of your exterior bag. So your panels, your pockets will be, your lining and your exterior will be wrong sides together. So it's basically just how the bag is going to look when it's done. So you're just sliding it right in all the way down. And then what we want to do is match up those side seams. So we're matching them up along the top edge, starting at the side seam, and then we're going to clip it all the way around. So again, match up that side seam, give it a clip right there. Usually I'll add a few right in that seam to help it to stay nice and straight and not kind of slip off course either way. And then I'll do the same here to the other side. Just adding a couple clips here to help hold it in place. Okay, and then flipping it around to the other side seam. Again, you're going to line up those seams. Clip it right there on that seam. Adding a few to either side to make sure that everything is lining up nice and straight. And then you're just going to continue clipping all the way around, clipping between those straps and making sure everything is laying nice and straight. Okay, so now that our bag is clipped all the way around, what we need to do now is just top stitch. So we are going to top stitch at about 1/8 of an inch all the way around the bag, and that is going to basically finish our bag. So we want to make sure we keep our straps up and out of the way, top stitch all the way around. I will go ahead and do that off camera, and I will be back to show you the finished bag. Okay guys, so here is what our finished bag looks like. It is so cute. I just love how this one turned out. It is waterproof canvas, and so it is so squishy since I didn't add any interfacing. It'll be great for packing. I think it's great for the beach or great for the pool. Looking at the inside, it's such a fun and unique assembly process to do that center pocket. So you have the two full pockets. Like, look how deep these pockets are. It's just amazing. It's so great. You can put so much stuff in here. So you have the full two pockets, and then you have the center pocket with this cute little heart zipper pull. And then you have the lining of the zipper pocket in the center. And yeah, it just turned out so cute. I love how this turned out. One of the things I thought of right away that you could use this bag for is like a project bag. So say you were working on crochet or knit or something like that. You could put like your books or your pattern or something in this pocket. And then in the other side, you could have your yarn stuck in there. And then in there, in the zipper pocket, you could put your hooks or your tools, your stitch markers, crochet hooks, anything like that. So I think that's just one thing that just popped right into my head, that it'd be such a great use for this bag. It is so cute. It was such an easy, fun sew. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me on this video tutorial. Thank you again to Knotted Threads for allowing us to use it. Again, it's such a neat bag. It's a neat structure and a neat assembly process. It goes together so quick. And like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for following along today and for supporting me. And please support the other sewists and the other designers in the Sewing Marathon Society's sewing series. And I look forward to seeing what you make.